Hello everyone, I'm Delaney, and today we're going to be talking about one of Shakespeare's most criticized heroines. That's right folks, I think it's time that Juliet got a little bit of sympathetic publicity. So, characters like Hamlet and Othello have all been analyzed from just about every possible angle, and believe me, I'm sure that you've all had to write essays about quite a few of them. However, as tends to be customary in literature, and in the real world for that matter, the ladies got the short end of the stick. Which is ridiculous, because once you start to look closely at these women and really dig into their motivations, you start to learn a lot about Shakespeare's time, and also a lot about our own. While writing in a time where women were considered lovely ornaments at best and property at worst, the way Shakespeare treated them in his plays was groundbreaking, and a closer look at them is certainly not Much Ado About Nothing. Next. Whatever you guys, I'm hilarious. So, to really understand how Shakespeare's women were unique, we have to know what a woman of the time would have looked like. To learn more about this, my team and I met with Dr. Patricia Lonchar, professor at the University of the Incarnate Word, and she helped us dispel some very common misconceptions about what a woman's life in the Elizabethan era was really like. What misconceptions, you may ask? Well, let's start at the top. Married off at 14 to someone she'd never met before, a mother by 17, dead by 30 because of childbirth. A pretty grim outlook. The truth, however, is a little more complicated than that. While nobles generally got betrothed around the age of 14 or 16, the marriage itself would not take place until both parties were 18 to 21. Common people tended to wait even longer, their early to mid-20s, so they would be financially stable when they started a family. And while women were still expected to have children, waiting until they were older meant the birthing process was a lot safer than we generally believe it to be. And what about their education? Well, middle to lower class women would have gotten a basic education in reading and writing, but little more after that. Upper class women, however, could generally expect a little bit more from their education, at least depending on the wills of their parents. As we see in Taming of the Shrew, it was not at all uncommon for nobility to hire tutors for their daughters. They would teach them everything from literature to history to singing to contemporary and classical languages. And I thought AP classes were stressful. The most notable result of such a Renaissance education was the Queen herself, who is once said to have responded to 3 different ambassadors in French, Latin, and Italian, one after the other. However, life for Elizabethan women wasn't all Greek and Latin. While education was considered important, for women, it was less of a necessity and more of an accessory. Girls who were taught Greek and Latin were not going to go on to become doctors and lawyers. Rather, they were going to go on, ideally, to use this knowledge to improve the life of their future husband. The most poignant example of this is King James, who, upon meeting a young woman who is famed for her knowledge of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, said, "Yes, but can she spin?" The accomplishments of women, no matter how incredible they were only considered valuable if they improved the lives of the men around them. Now, everybody knows Juliet's story, but just in case you've been living under a rock for your entire life, let's recap. Girl meets boy. Girl falls in love with boy. Girl decides that she is going to get secretly married to boy. Girl decides to pretend to kill herself so she can run off with boy. Boy doesn't quite get the memo, thinks she's dead for real, and decides to kill himself. Girl wakes up and finds him, cries for a little bit, and then kills herself for real. Kind of a grim story. Now, I will be the first to admit that Juliet comes off as immature and childish. However, before we judge her too harshly, it's important to take into consideration the world that she would have grown up in. By Elizabethan standards, Paris was perfect marriage material. Handsome, rich, close to power, and there is no evidence in the play that he's cruel. By these Elizabethan standards, there's no reason that Juliet should refuse to marry him. Except she has one. She's not in love with him. She's a 13-year-old who's being asked by her parents to become a woman for a man that she has never met in the span of a few short weeks, and she doesn't want to do that. Maybe Romeo isn't the best choice for her. He is dramatic and flighty and doesn't think before he acts, and his rebound time is a little too quick for comfort. However, whether or not he was a good choice is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, he was her choice. At the end of the day, it didn't matter that her father disapproved of him or that her father had already planned another match for her. She prioritized her own emotions and her own decisions over that of her father. And for the time, it was a pretty revolutionary act. Many argue that Romeo and Juliet is supposed to be a cautionary tale. While I don't necessarily disagree with that interpretation, it's important to remember that both characters, Juliet specifically, are presented sympathetically throughout the play. The audience is meant to relate to them. This is supported by the fact that Juliet is, from all accounts and purposes, a quote-unquote good girl. When your value as a person is determined by your ability to make a happy home for your husband, it follows that your societally accepted place is in the home, a place where Juliet, notably, never leaves, except in her marriage to Romeo. While Romeo and Juliet is filled with scenes of Romeo gallivanting the streets, harassing people, and generally being a delinquent, Juliet is inside for the entire play. Even when she has to get in contact with Romeo, she sends a messenger. Because Juliet was, for the time anyway, the archetypal good girl, she is that much more sympathetic, and her decision to be with Romeo that much more credible. Juliet holds a very complicated place in literature. She is certainly not without her flaws, nor is she undeserving of criticism. However, in a time when women were expected to have no dreams or ambitions outside of those that the men in their life had for them, she is most certainly a woman of will. I'm Delaney. Thanks for watching.